While connected technology is essential for unlocking new efficiencies on the production floor, it's also presented hackers with new opportunities to steal valuable IP and data. To support OT professionals in their battle with cyber criminals, we launched the Security Breach podcast. In each of our over 100 episodes, we've brought in cybersecurity specialists to provide valuable insights and break down critical topics. As a go-to podcast for our listeners, we want to help you align your brand with our expertise. By sponsoring our podcast, your brand will build trust, and your message will stand out to an audience searching for tools to assist their cybersecurity efforts. Secure your share in this rapidly growing segment by sponsoring Security Breach. Contact us today to learn more. Hi, I'm Jeff Ranke, Editorial Director of Manufacturing.net and Manufacturing Business Technology. Welcome to Security Breach. Uptime. It's the lifeblood of manufacturing and the precise target of industrial sector hackers. By knocking systems offline, stealing credentials, holding data for ransom, or crippling supply chains, the bad guys know their ultimate goal of disruption or extortion will be realized. And as we've discussed numerous times here on Security Breach, keeping these bad actors out has become more and more difficult as new technology, connectivity, and endpoints are added to the OT landscape. Hackers are getting smarter and more complex. But the good news is so are the tools and strategies for the good guys. Here to offer some perspective on dealing with the leading threats targeting the people, systems, and data of the industrial sector is a collection of experts focused on minimizing disruptions and preparing you to react and respond to cyber attacks. First, we'll hear from Max Clausen, Senior VP of Network Connectivity at Zayo, as he dives into the factors and strategies driving DDoS, or distributed denial of service attacks. So, Max, thanks so much for joining us, and welcome to Security Breach.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're going to jump right into it here. You guys put out this really interesting report talking about the state of DDoS attacks. There's a lot of interesting information in there. It's obviously a very timely topic, especially for the industrial sector with everything that's going on in it. The DDoS attacks really hit people where it hurts because we're talking about stopping operations. That's death in a manufacturing facility. So as you were putting together this report, was there anything that sort of jumped out at you or really confirmed maybe some things that you thought about going into developing the report?
Yeah, so we've been doing this report for a couple of years now. We release it twice a year, and the trends that we're seeing really are a continuation of the trends that we've been seeing over the last couple of years. So continuing to see significant year over year, quarter over quarter increases in both the volumes of attacks. And also seeing those attacks kind of proliferate out across a really broad range of industries and segments. So we cover customers that are, across the gamut in terms of their focus areas, and we're seeing those DDoS attacks really impact or target really everyone across the range.
So I know there's probably a number of numerous responses to this question, but if you're going to pinpoint things a little bit, what do you think is leading to this? I think your report said something like a 257% increase in these distributed denial of service attacks. Are there some things that you were able to pinpoint and really say this is what's really leading to the proliferation of these types of actions?
Yeah, so as you said, so in manufacturing in particular, we actually saw one of the largest percent increases in attacks. I think there are a couple things that are contributing to that. One is the advent of AI and of advanced tools that are frankly just making it easier to launch attacks, to continue to update attacks, to launch a higher volume of attacks because there are far fewer manual steps to go through. So I think that's a continuation of a trend that we've been seeing, and certainly something that we've got our eye on going forward. I think the other thing that I would point out is, AI, the DDoS attacks really are often a kind of call it a gateway drug, maybe, a way of sort of testing networks for vulnerabilities and finding ways to more deeply infiltrate the network. So while the DDoS attack in and of itself can be really disruptive, it might be a precursor to things that are more impactful down the road.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've seen in manufacturing specifically is with these denial of service attacks, they seem to spring up over and over again because we're never able to get the bad guys completely out of the system or out of the network. These whole living off the land, these dwelling attacks seem to really be a bigger issue all the time for manufacturing. Have you seen this as well in terms of these popping up or reoccurring types of DDoS attacks because we're not able to get everybody out of the system?
Yeah, one of the things that we highlight in the report relates to the duration of the attacks. And so while the frequency of attacks is growing significantly over time, the duration of the attacks is actually shrinking. So we see the vast preponderance, 98% of our attacks are less than 30 minutes in duration, and a significant number are less than 10 minutes in duration. Given that amount of time, it's hard to do more than just manage the attack in and of itself, rather than getting to kind of the root cause. So it's more of a defensive posturing than it is a proactive rooting out of the bad actors. So I think that's a trend that we've seen as well, and so it just perpetuates kind of short duration, high frequency attacks that can be just as painful, but are very hard to fully eradicate.
Is the short duration, is that simply because they're getting the data that they need, they're shutting things down and grabbing what they want, and then they're leaving? Or is it the response of the people being attacked?
Yeah, so the types of attacks that we see are really about trying to shut down network infrastructure, less about trying to extract a lot of information from that network. So really what we're seeing are these short duration attacks that can be very disruptive in the manufacturing world, can shut down production lines, can shut down entire networks, but the attacks are kind of in and out, and so it's less about shutting things down in a permanent way and more about just creating disruption and headache for those that are attacked.
Now let's hear from John Kars, Field CISO at SquareX, as he discusses the ongoing impact of developing and legacy vulnerabilities, as well as some of the novel strategies hackers are using to introduce new strands of highly disruptive malware.
I think another factor that's inhibiting good security practices and good security postures in industrial control systems in particular is also the fact that even if you wanted to take them down to do maintenance or those kinds of activities with them, you'd be impacting something that was probably important to environment. So you kind of have two things. One, you're dealing with a lot of end of life kind of systems that are don't have patches anymore, so they have built-in vulnerabilities. And then even if you had a more up-to-date systems like even in like telco spaces where you put new radios in places, you might be state of the art at the time that you put them in place, but finding that time to also update those systems would be challenging as well when you're trying to make sure those systems are up and running for what they need to be doing. When I was doing work with the military, we spent a lot of time on preventative technologies, and we didn't spend a lot of time on detection and response. I mean, not where I was working. We spent a lot of time engineering systems that were secure, that would go in an environment that was secure, and then we would, patch them and keep them up to date and maintain the systems. In commercial, it's a bit different. There's less time thinking about the configuration of the environments, the preventative capabilities that you could put into a system, and then you're deploying systems that don't have a lot of documentation onto networks that are running production code. I think that coming out of the military world, I thought that the biggest problem that we were going to have was actually patching. Like that was like what we needed to do. But as I was running a security operations center for JP Morgan Chase, what I found was that it was really the configuration of my logs, what logs to have, putting those kinds of things so that you could build a good detection capability. But then the other part of that is having a good response capability as well. How is it that you defend the networks that, once you have something that looks like it's an attack? From philosophy wise, I think that changed my point of view. I'm much more concerned about detection and response capabilities than I am about preventative capabilities. I'm less concerned about being, I'm less concerned about 0 days because I want to have a system that I can detect a threat within a certain amount of time, depending on the risk appetite of the environment. And then being able to respond well is really important, because if you're going to have an actor on your network, how do you contain it? How do you keep systems up and running so that they can continue to operate while also eradicating the actor from your network? I think those kinds of capabilities became much more predominant in my thinking when I'm thinking about defense strategies today.
Yeah. And that's interesting because, and I think there's room for debate depending on application and environment in terms of where your priorities lie. But the part that's always lacking and that we never put enough focus on is that response. We want to keep people out. We want to detect them, but then what? And I think that's something that just is not get enough emphasis for, regardless of the enterprise, whether it's military, manufacturing, whatever.
I agree. I think that I think that response starts when you have a detection. You have some alert that's showing up, and it's so difficult with so much information that we have available to us today to determine whether something is threatening or not threatening. If it's just like normal operations versus an actor on your network, that's a hard decision to make for many analysts. And then if you think about the complexities of networks, when you have like 400,000 nodes on your network, and you see things going on in your network, and you have a lot of telemetry, are you looking at hay or are you looking at a needle? It's really hard to tell. And then if you take a little bit further and you're not knowledgeable about the systems that you're protecting, then everything looks threatening. Everything looks like it's something that you should be responding to, which creates a lot of fatigue. And folks get burned two ways, right? When they say, hey, there's something that looks interesting and we should look at this more. And then they get hit because it was just normal operations. And then on the other side, you get hit when you don't take early initiative faster, right? So it's a really, difficult place to be in, but the response, starting with how you investigate an alert and how you respond to it and how your defenses are working. There's a lot of work that goes in on the response side, because not everything needs to be an incident for you to learn from it, right? If you can see something that's an attack that's happening, maybe it fails at this place, but just knowing that you had a gap in your defense posture that you could take an action on is something worth learning from. And how do we incorporate that into our response capabilities? I think that's the hard thing to do.
Another thing, John, I'd like to get your feedback on, and this is kind of surprising to me because I think with all of the tools we have out there and the fact that the industry is doing a better job of sharing information, there's still a lot of new malware strains that are getting dropped on ICSs all the time. And I don't know if the solution is better detection and response like we've been talking about, if it's getting on the dark web to understand who some of these brokers are with these malware strains and understanding their tactics. But we're getting hit hard, and it seems like we're falling behind a little bit here. What are your thoughts in maybe helping manufacturers be better prepared?
Well, I think it goes back to, for malware to get onto a system, there was a natural attack evolution, meaning attacks evolve, right? And as you kind of move through the space, you initiate an attack. Maybe it's a phishing email. Maybe it's, maybe it's a USB stick that they left on the floor, next to the manufacturing plant. It could be any kind of ways of them getting initial access. Being able to control, what the opportunity is, what steps need to take for you to get to that critical piece of infrastructure. There's going to be networking involved, protocols involved. You're talking about malware getting to a system so that you can impact it. Those have a path, right? And on your network, you have defenses that you can lay in front of that to make it more difficult to get there. Going back to what I think is happening in the industry is that what we're seeing is that there's more cloud services that are being delivered for manufacturing plants or other OT environments. At the same time, those have to have network connectivity. What are we doing to make sure that network connectivity is secure? whether that's confidentiality, integrity, or both. What are we doing about that? And then how are we laying out our access control so that you can prevent something being delivered to that location? So this is, for me, it's very much, how do you control the network? How do you control the flows? How do you control outflows in the environment, which again was fortunately or unfortunately, in OT environments, we do still have that physical location that we're trying to protect, right? So we have to do our good physical security stuff around that. But now that we're bringing the network to this physical place, what are we doing to make sure that we're securing that network? And we have lots of really good practices that are available. I think, having worked in finance and military and tech companies and manufacturing and in different countries from my, in my experience, is that what I see is that these different industries kind of grow in different ways, right? And this is what's important to this industry in 1990s and 2000 and 2010s. And this is what's important to this other industry. And they have different growth journeys in each of these industries. But we don't spend a lot of time looking across industries and seeing, did someone already fix this problem? And I think from my perspective, what I see is that often the problems that we're having are actually being fixed somewhere else because they hit that problem earlier in their, industry journey, right? The industry growth path, right? And so look around, talk to folks that are in adjacent industries and see how they solve the problems. But this feels like if you have malware strains that are getting down to your systems, it's when it's all said and done, it's there's some sort of CPU that's processing this, right? And it had to have some access to make that happen, whether that was physical access or over the network. What are we doing to make sure that we're able to control those access points, right? And just kind of go backwards from there and say, hey, how did this happen? How did this happen? How did that happen? And learn from other industries.
I think that's a great point. I mean, manufacturing could learn a lot from healthcare, from the financial sector, from the insurance sector in terms of protecting themselves against a lot of these things. Ransomware is a huge issue for manufacturers in particular. Absolutely. And it also comes back to a lot of things you've been talking about here in terms of the human element. So people are understanding. I think universally we're trying to get away from that sort of blame and shame type of dynamic with employees and help them understand good cybersecurity practices as well. Wrapping things up is Amit Hammer, CEO of Salvador Tech. He joins us to talk about lessons learned from the recent Jaguar Land Rover attack and how response strategies will continue to play a key role in minimizing attack-related downtime. Amit, thanks so much for joining us today. We want to talk about this Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack. There's a lot we don't know, but some of the things we do know in terms of the level of disruption has been pretty significant. What do you think are some of the things that we're learning or that we can take away from this attack in terms of maybe some things JLR could have done to prevent it?
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be here. I think JLR did a lot of things right. Okay, and for sure, acting fast to contain the threat. The bigger challenge is what happens next when you move from containment to recovery. In many industrial environments, recovery is still a manual, highly complex process. You have to make sure backups are clean, rebuild the systems from scratch, go through multiple validation steps before you can reconnect to production networks. I think what they could have done differently isn't about more firewalls or detection tools. It's about engineering their recovery plan in advance. That means having pre-validated, offline, immutable system images, what we call golden images, that can be restored instantly. When those exist, you don't spend weeks rebuilding. You recover in minutes, return to known good operational state with your confidence. And that's where the shift has to happen, from focusing only on prevention and detection to designing for recovery from day one.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Now in its 5th season, Inspiring Tech Leaders is the podcast that talks about technology strategies, challenges, and breakthroughs shaping today's digital world. Each week, Inspiring Tech Leaders brings you technology reviews and interviews with visionary CIOs, CTOs, and industry pioneers. Whether you're leading a tech team or just love innovation, Inspiring Tech Leaders is your go-to source for inspiration and real-world advice. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.
You know, that's interesting because that is a challenge for a lot of manufacturing and those in the industrial sector. Detection is one part of it, and then that response and reaction to it. Jaguar Land Rover had to shut down for roughly a month, and it had far-reaching effects into the automotive supply chain and within the British economy as well. How do you feel they did in communicating what was going on to their employees and their stakeholders? Was their response plan as transparent maybe as it could have been, or were there areas where they could have improved?
So I think the response plan was there, and communication was there. I think after a couple of days they announced it, and it's the shockwave and the impact on of course the employees and their business and supply chain is so huge that communication plan by itself is not enough. There's got to be a recovery plan in place.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's early. We're still learning more about the attack and really the expanse of it. But do you think right now, just from what we do know, are there lessons that the industrial sector can take away from this particular attack and try to apply to some of their plans?
Absolutely. I think the lesson for the entire industrial sector is that OT and ICS environments are now prime targets. What used to be considered too specialized or too isolated to attack is now front and center in global cyber operations. According to IBM Threat Intelligence report, manufacturing today accounts for more than a quarter of all cyber attacks. Average recovery time after a cyber incident in manufacturing critical infrastructure is still around 2 weeks. And yes, unfortunately, it can take much longer than the averages we saw in the JLR case.
Yeah.
In these industries, every hour means lost revenue, production delays, in some cases, even safety risks. So the key takeaway is that even organizations with mature security programs like JLR are realizing that prevention alone cannot stop a business shutdown. The ones that recover fastest are the ones that have planned, exercised, and automated the recovery long before the attack happens. Resilience can't be reactive. It has to be built into the operational DNA, tested and validated and ready.
Yeah. And I'm glad you bring that up about sort of the feelings that nobody's interested in attacking this OT technology landscape when that's just not the case. There's so many smaller manufacturers who probably are not advanced technologically as somebody like Jaguar Land Rover, yet they were hit pretty hard and it's assumed it's a ransomware attack. There's huge fallouts from it. It should be sort of a case study, or at least a bigger warning to smaller manufacturers as well, how susceptible they really can be. OT
Absolutely.
has always been jokingly referred to as old technology. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you've learned in working with industrial enterprises in trying to reinforce the fact that it's just a very different dynamic than like IT and trying to secure this OT environment.
You know, there is a big difference between IT and OT from perspective. Cybersecurity in IT is a lot about protecting the data, preserving the data, keeping against the theft and stuff like that. And in OT, it's a lot about operational continuity, being able to get back to production.
Yep, absolutely. Very different dynamic there.
Right.
It's rumored, Amit, that this was a ransomware attack. We don't know a lot of the details there, but I know that's a subject matter that you deal with quite a bit in terms of helping companies prepare for, respond to, things like that. What's going on right now? What are you seeing as some of the biggest trends when it comes to ransomware, the industrial sector, and how folks are responding to it?
So over the last few years, ransomware has evolved from a criminal business model into a strategic weapon. We're seeing attacks that are far more sophisticated, blending IT and OT in ways that used to be rare. in many cases, attackers, they don't start in the control level. They start in IT with stolen credentials or vendor access, and then they pivot laterally into OT networks. And that's what makes modern incidents so disruptive. There's also a shift from pure ransom to operational disruption. Attackers like Volt Typhoon, for example, or other state-linked actors are embedding themselves quietly in the critical infrastructure, not necessarily to demand money right away, but to position themselves for future disruption, whether it's for future ransom or other reasons. And in many cases, they're using what we call living of the land tactic, legitimate tools, valid credentials, no malware at all. So it's very hard to detect these intrusions. The interesting part is that these campaigns aren't about data anymore, like we mentioned with the IT versus OT perspective. They're about downtime. Their target recovery process, the backups, engineering workstation, because that's where it's really hurt manufacturing. Which is why, again, resilience becomes the last line of defense. If you can restore operations instantly and safely, you take away the hacker's leverage.
So one of the struggles in the industrial sector is patching, dealing with a lot of these new vulnerabilities that are popping up in the ICS or related technologies. And that leads into that downtime dynamic. You want to patch, you want to get things back up and running, but we have to stop things in order to apply the patch at times. Are there different strategies or best practices that you've seen implemented or you advise folks to take in sort of handling some of that patching and balancing the downtime that it can create?
So first of all, the reasoning behind the patching is that these are legacy systems and they have been out there for many, many years and not always been updated. So the vulnerabilities are being exposed and exploited by attackers. So there's a good reason to try and patch these systems as you can, but it's not always possible. I think that one of the fear that OT security managers and plant managers have is that if they deploy a patch, they will actually ruin something that is currently working or have been working for years. And I'm afraid there is a trade-off there between patching to increase cybersecurity and the fact that it's currently operating and you don't want to ruin it. So one of the unique things that, or unique approach to this is to create some kind of a sandbox that you can deploy the patch in a sandbox separately from the actual production line. Make sure that the machine is operating correctly, that everything is fine, and only then deploy that in the actual production line. And this approach has been gaining some traction, and it's actually a good solution for the trade-off between patching and being secured versus keeping things operational.
Well, I think that's a great tactic because digital twins are something that we see deployed a lot on the plant floor and testing new automation technologies and other types of equipment investments. So this is a similar dynamic that I think a lot of operational folks should really be able to grab onto. It's a good call.
Right.
This has been wonderful. Really appreciate you taking the time to dive into this. Whether we look at the Jaguar Land Rover attack or just things in general with cybersecurity, are there any big trends that you're really keeping an eye on as we look forward for the next year and a half?
So AI, of course. Yeah. We all monitor that, and there's a race there. Okay, you can see more and more sophisticated attacks. Some are using AI, some are saying that they're using AI, but definitely more and more sophisticated attacks, and we see more and more ransomware and attacks that are specifically tailored and targeting the OT. So that's one concern. On the other hand, AI gives us a lot of opportunity to defend better. So you can see that, for example, in our product, we're utilizing AI in order to oversee compliance and make sure that all the backups and all the recovery is there and everything is ready and according to regulations. Another use we do with AI is to make sure we keep the backup safe and keep the backup integrity, utilizing AI analytics and tools. So this is definitely a trend that we're all tracking, and it's a race between the attackers and the defenders.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we know the bad guys are using it, but I think the good guys have gotten better at employing AI into their defenses and finding the right fit for it.
Right.
Absolutely. Awesome. Good stuff, Amit. Really appreciate the time. If folks want to find out a little bit more about you and your company, where should they go?
So definitely go to our website at salvadortech.com. And if there is one thing I'd leave your listeners with, at the end of the day, cyber resilience is not about avoiding incidents. It's about ensuring continuity when they happen. Prevention and detection are critical, but they don't stop downtime. In OT, every hour of downtime affects real-world output, production stuff, major financial impact, safety, supply chains, and even public trust. And that's the new definition of resilience, not just cybersecurity and detection, but operational continuity. And thank you for having me, Jeff. It's been a pleasure discussing this important topic with you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Amit. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thanks to the panel for their insights, and thank you for joining us today. To catch up on past episodes, you can go to manufacturing.net, IEN.com, or mbtmag.com. You can also check Security Breach out wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Amazon, and Overcast. And if you have a cybersecurity story or topic that you'd like to have us explore on Security Breach, you can reach me at jeff@IEN.com. For Max, John, and Amit, I'm Jeff Ranke, and this is Security Breach.